The gallery, you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are on airplane mode and that all devices are muted. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. In terms of apologies, we have one from William, and we have Aoife joining us via Zoom. Hello, Aoife. Agenda item 2, which is declarations of interest. I remind you of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Do any members have any matters that they want to declare?
Yes, Chair, I have a declaring interest as a landlord.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much for that. Chairperson's business then. Last Thursday was our informal Nutrients Action Programme stakeholder event. The team are collating feedback from stakeholders and expect to provide a draft summary next week, but I would like to note the constructive and positive atmosphere in the room despite us discussing a controversial and sometimes divisive subject. The feedback from those taking notes suggests an animated but respectful conversation did take place. General themes picked up the tables was one of welcoming the opportunity to discuss the issues with people and organisations coming from different perspectives. Active discussion of areas in common between environmental and farming groups. Clearly, the committee needs to build on this engagement, and we will agree next steps once we have seen the Clark summary. But at this stage, I'd like to thank members for their very constructive support for the event, and also the committee team alongside their colleagues from Engagement Research and Parliamentary Services. And you can see there was quite a team put together for that, and that helped it flow really well. Do any members have any comments to make at this stage, or are you prepared to wait till next week? Thank you, members. Item number 2, I've been taking advice. As discussed at the meeting on the 6th of November, I am content to pass evidence relating to an alleged instance of animal mistreatment at Athby. Members will recall that the Minister wrote to the committee on the 4th of November to confirm that he was taking the matter extremely seriously and inspections have been undertaken. We will await the Department's response to that material. Happy enough, members? Yep. Okay, item number 3, members, we have 2 evidence sessions relating to the Dilapidation Bill today, and stakeholders have to date mentioned the need for rates reform if the bill is to really affect change. The Finance Minister was on his feet in the Chamber this week and spoke to the need to challenge the blight of vacant properties in our villages, towns and city centres. Amongst other things, he spoke of the ambition to elevate non-domestic vacant rating liability from 50 to 75% and then to 100%. And policy work has begun to seek executive agreement, and the committee will be interested in how this progresses. Members, I refer you to page 6 of the pack to correspondence from the Minister dated the 12th of November regarding the announcement of the UK Government for the £360 million fishing and coastal growth fund allocation. The devolved governments have been allocated £56 million of the total £60 million fund based on the Barnett formula, of which Northern Ireland is expected to receive £10 million. The Minister has expressed his disappointment that the share of funding earmarked to Northern Ireland, as he believes it does not adequately reflect our overall contribution to the UK fishing effort. Officials will continue to engage with DEFRA to seek a fair and more equitable share of the fund, and will update the committee of any further developments. I absolutely agree with the Minister in this instance. Michelle, you're always a big supporter of the fishing fraternity. So are members content to note that, or should we? I think we could maybe inform the Minister that we're aware of that and we support any efforts that he's going to make in regard to trying to massage a bigger percentage for Northern Ireland fisheries. I mean, 10 million out of 360 million is pretty poor. You can tell just Chair, it's always a challenge. We'd had the discussion about maybe having representation from the fishing industry, if that would be possible maybe to do just at the earliest opportunity. Yeah, in fact that's a good point, because I was contacted yesterday by NFF about another issue, which is the quotas, which are going to be cut drastically again. So I've just passed that this morning to the team here to invite them for a briefing, and we could include that if that's okay. So in terms of the response to the email they've sent me, which is a separate issue to this, but this is another significant issue that affects them. So if we could ensure that they're aware that we are alert to that as a committee, and we would like them to share their views on that when we do arrange the date. Is that okay?
Yeah. Share their views on the funding.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before we leave it, and I'm happy enough to go out to the Minister, highlight we discussed it, and we support the efforts to increase the offer here, as it were. There will be further engagement according to the letter with DEFRA, so perhaps a request to keep us updated on that, which in turn gives us an avenue to explore further as a committee if we need to.
Yeah.
Not okay?
Yeah. Enough. Yes. Thank you for that, Joe. Okay, members, refer to page 10 of the pack, correspondence dated the 14th of November from next Energy Capital regarding its concerns at the UK Government's proposal to shift inflation-linked payments under renewables obligation and feed-in tariffs schemes for RPI to CPI. You may wish to note that the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero has a consultation seeking views on proposals to change how the cost of the 3 RO schemes are adjusted. The consultation closes on at 5 p.m. on the 28th of November and covers this jurisdiction. So I propose to forward this correspondence to the Economy Committee. Do any members have any comments? Okay, agenda item 4 is the minutes of the meeting on the 13th of November. Referred to the draft minutes from our meeting dated the 30th of November. Amber starts at page 13 of your pack. Have you any comments, or are you content with the minutes as drafted? And if so, I will sign them on the website. Thank you, members. Okay, agenda item 5, matters arising. Refer you to page 21 of the pack to correspondence from the Department dated 12th of November regarding the Equality Impact Assessment EQIA screening of statutory rules. In response to the committee asking if there is a standard approach to the consideration of EQIA screening and details of the guidance available for DAERA officials. The committee had noted that no SRs appeared to be screened in for the Equality Impact Assessment. A copy of the standard EQIA screen template and instructions on how EQIAs are completed have been provided starting page 23 of your pack. Members, the Department's Equality Scheme 21 to 25 states how it will comply with its equality duties under Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. Staff are also referred to the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland's guidance on how to carry out an assessment and can also refer to DAERA's capacity, capability, equality and diversity branch for advice and guidance before decisions on the EQIA and related equality matters are reached. Have you any comments? Are you content to note?
Content.
Okay, members. I refer you to page 3 of the table of papers to correspondence. Michael? Just hang fire if you don't mind. I'll get to here. I'm maybe going to take a short break there and just for me saying thank you. I refer you to page 3 of the table of papers to correspondence from the Department dated the 12th of November regarding the SR 2025-178, the Environmental Protection Wet Wipes Containing Plastic Regulations 2025, which was led in the Business Office on the 18th of November. The SL5 and explanatory memorandum are also included in table papers. Members, the equivalent legislation was signed into law in England on Tuesday this week and will come into force in spring 2027. We were briefed on the SL1 on the 19th of November last year. Given the passage of time, do you wish for a further briefing as offered by the Department? Members content? Yeah. Okay, members. Just before we would seek to move into agenda item 6, the Dilapidation Bill, I'm going to ask for your forbearance with me, and if we could take a short break at this stage. It's World Children's Day. There's an event starting in the Long Gallery in about 10 minutes, and I've been asked to open that event. And given that we only have a quorum of 5, would you be content if we suspend the meeting for 10 to 15 minutes and restart at that stage? Members content?
Content.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, thank you very much, members, for your patience with me there. We're now going to move on to agenda item 6, which is the Dilapidation Bill, and at the oral evidence session for the Landlords Association for Northern Ireland. So we will invite them into the room. So members, the details for this starts in your pack at page 89 for the written submission detailing Lanny's views on the bill. So I'm going to welcome the following representatives to give their evidence to the committee and answer any questions that the members may have. We should have Mr. Robert Greer, who is the chair, Mr. Dairmid Laird, who is the estate agent and property manager, Mr. Stephen Magill, estate agent and property manager, and Mr. Richard Smyth from Lanny. Did you hear your names getting mentioned there, gentlemen? Got them okay, yeah? Really appreciate that. So when you get settled, if you just let me know, and then we'll take your evidence at that stage. Thank you.
Additional from Clem.
Okay. Robert, do you want to?
Hello, Chair. Do I open up?
Yes, please, Robert. You're well named, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, the first instance, thank you very much to the committee for allowing us to address you today. Second instance, I would say, for those of you who don't know, Landlords Association for Northern Ireland, we were formed in 1988, and our main purpose in our thing is education. We have 6 to 8 main lectures a year on different aspects of landlordism and what new bills are coming in. And naturally, we also lobby where we think we can gain some traction. Now today we're talking on this bill, and we have 3 others with me, which I'm going to defer to Richard. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think, I don't know whether you have, we did submit a paper or a response to the, on the 3rd of October, which we covered most of the points. I don't know if any of you you've seen that.
Yeah, we have that.
Well, if I can work with that,
Yes.
most of our, it's looking for the reason why properties are vacant, and there always is a reason. Now, there are a lot of, for instance, in rural towns, in small towns, very often there are derelict shops. There's usually a reason for that. Maybe it's because a Tesco's opened on the periphery, and then the local butcher can't survive anymore. What do we do? We know the problem. Just serving a notice on the owner, the local butcher is put out of business, he's lost his livelihood. This bill is now going to slap a notice on him to go and to spend money on his shop, which there's no money coming in anymore. So there are cases like that where it feels a little bit unfair. This is a stick, we would like a carrot too. But then that leads me on to the next problem. What do you do with a vacant shop in the middle of a town where the footfall is down and you can't compete against Tesco? So we know the problem. This just feels like a bit of a stick sometimes, which feels unfair. I don't know what the solution is. Now, in a lot of cases, those buildings might need repurposed, and there are other types of buildings as well. But we know repurposing it to what, and then you're stuck with planning problems. We know the planning problems now with dealing with wastewater, etc. That repurposing for maybe residential or whatever is so difficult, and so the solutions are not really contained in this bill. It feels like a stick with not really a solution. The other ones, when we look at the other types of buildings, apart from shops, you have churches all over the country which have fallen into disuse. Now, some of those will be in heritage sites, so you take that into account. But again, how do you repurpose them? There are cases too where there are houses. There are cases where there are houses in the middle of a block, and maybe the owner has got lost or whatever, and they are causing they're an eyesore. Yes, let's try and deal with that. But again, it might be a case that they'd be better turned into flats or repurposed in some way, or HMO or whatever. So just to say the owner has to immediately within 14 days start dealing with it, re-roofing it, not with it, whatever, it's not really the right solution. So we look at this, and although it has some merit, there are various things in that point. Those are the problems. The solutions. I think firstly we should get a warning notice. One of my problems in that submission that we made are the deadlines, the strict deadlines. Very often these properties are lying vacant for years. Suddenly the council are going to slap a notice, you have 14 days to appeal it, and another few days then to do something. It's been lying vacant for so long. You could be on holidays, somebody could get the notice served on them, they could be on holidays, 14 days to appeal. It's too short. It should be, maybe 3 months or whatever, and ideally there should be a warning notice served first that we're going to do this. And so a lot of this is, so that the owner and the councils can work on a solution rather than bang. You've got a notice, if you don't do it in a certain time, you've got a conviction. And these convictions for not doing things, they can affect if you try to go to America, if you get a conviction and you try to go to America, you've got to declare it. There are other things where we all really don't want convictions. But every owner that's got a property, they want a solution. This just doesn't provide it. It's much more complicated than this simplistic act will sort. The other thing, so the deadlines, we've covered the deadlines in that, and we've covered the reasons it could be lying vacant. On the appeals for against a notice, it's too prescriptive. There only are 4 or 5 different reasons. What if it's been served on the wrong person? It should be served on the appropriate person. It could be served, we have properties that we manage, and there are minority shareholders. Some of them own 2.5% of the property. They will show up on land registry. They might be the only person in Northern Ireland that could get served. And they're not really in control of what happens. I would want in the list of valid reasons for an appeal against a notice, I would like an extra one to say I'm not the appropriate person. The other thing would be trustees. They're in probate or in charities or whatever, the trustee will come through as an interested person and they can get a notice served on them. And under the list of valid appeal reasons, not being the appropriate person isn't listed. So we think we need to get that added on so you can make I'm a trustee. Where would you get a trustee to administer your estate if they all thought that they could get a conviction for not dealing with a property, which may be part of a family dispute? And probate, we have had probate cases lasting for years, and that's the reason the property lies vacant. You can't, in theory, the trustee can get fined and get a conviction for that. So there are too many it's too simplistic, this bill. We can see the merit in some of it, but it needs some of those amendments to reflect those problems. We would love, in the case of towns, urban development grants coming back in, maybe a step too far, but this is the stick, not a carrot, to try and refurbish our centre towns. So maybe that is coming later, who knows. But so that's, the other thing is time to sell. If you have a notice slapped on you to do something to a property, it's been lying, okay, what do we do with it? I'm going to sell it. You have 14 days to appeal, and etc. It could take 6 months to sell something. We need to have more reasonable timescales for something which has been probably lying vacant for 5 years. So work on the timescales, please, and the appeals, and so that's just me covering my quick thoughts, if that's okay.
Rob, thank you.
Eric, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think one of our issues, as Richard says, while the basic thrust of the bill, there's an awful lot in there which is good and hopefully is fit for purpose. One of the aspects is that it does give councils completely unfettered rights. So there's no there's no limit to the scope of what can be asked for. And in addition to that, as I say, when you're talking about amenity, it's completely subjective. I think it's very hard. One person thinks that's affecting amenity, somebody else doesn't, and we see that as being an issue. There isn't any aspect of the bill, or appears to be, where discretion can be applied. I think it's very dangerous whenever any legislation is brought out where the folk in charge, the councils, don't have that ability to exercise discretion. We've seen it in other legislation that's been brought in, and even indeed where there's been guidance applied by the department, the guidance has been ignored because, as I say, the council have said, look, sorry, we have taken legal advice, and the legal advice says that we can go with the wording of the legislation rather than the guidance. So, as I say, I would like to see some sort of discretion being entered into it. So for exceptional circumstances, because I don't think with any legislation you can get any one jacket that fits everybody. And then the final thing I wanted to mention was, as Richard has said, this obviously gives the council powers, to sanction property owners. The problem is that it's going to lead to very much sort of sticking plaster repairs. And ideally, if some repair is being carried out, you want to see something which is sustainable rather than something which maybe just pushes it slightly further down the line. I think planning relaxations is something that should be considered with it. Obviously, housing is an enormous problem, more so perhaps in rural areas than anywhere else. And whilst it doesn't pay, if you take the example of the shop, the butcher, to pay the money to do it up again as a shop, if there was some sort of relaxation, and this could be, put into 2 one-bedroom flats, and some sort of enhanced planning aspect, it would sort the problem of housing and give the property owner the opportunity to be able to spend money or sell it to somebody who can spend money on it. There has to be an economic return from the property. Other than that, all we're doing, as I say, is putting a stick and plaster on it, pushing it further down the line, and when that stick and plaster falls off, there'll be another stick and plaster. It doesn't get to the actual fallout and cause of the issue.
There's no real, from my point of view, there's no real specific detail on what you need to do to a property. So if the property is sit with no roof on, do you put a roof on? If you have to put that roof on, must it comply with current building control standards? Do we need to get building control for that? If the windows are broken, do we put new windows in? Do we board them up and paint them like happens all around Belfast? There needs to be more detail of what has to be done before notice can be given. I also worry as a landlord who is also a property owner that if there's a minor low-level neglect or dilapidation, I can be hit with a £500 fine, which is fine if I'm aware of that. But if, say, I'm on ill, travelling or whatever, I'll have to go to court. And I know from our experiences with another bill that if I go to court and I lose my appeal and I lose in court, I will not be a fit and proper person to be a landlord. Their own houses, so I'll lose my livelihood. Something like this needs to be, it needs to be reasonable to what the cause is. And I'd be worried about potential of myself losing my livelihood because I've missed something by 28 days. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, look, you've heard, committee, you've heard what my three colleagues say here. What I'm leave you with thoughts is the question is not asked as to why a valuable asset remains in a derelict condition. Why does it sit there for 20 years? These people pay rates on these properties. And the answer, I think, is we think it's the difficulty obtaining planning permission for an effective and economic use. I'm thinking in the housing management area that I know. We have quite a number of derelict buildings, mainly the wider university area, and they're lying empty, but you can't get any planning on them other than for a single family home. So, excuse me, the trouble with single family homes, they could be brought in, but it's the cost of rehabilitation. Staggering building costs at the minute are about £2,000 per square metre, £200 a square foot. And no landlord or no party is going to spend that sort of money in order to house a family without, and I dare introduce the ugly thing about looking for a grant of some sort, rather like the UDG grants that we had. In other words, it would be a shortfall after the rehabilitation, whatever the shortfall was, a percentage. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, thank you. And I think what you've certainly done is illustrate the complexity of the issue, because I think that certainly in the opening submission it ranged from the high street, the butcher shop closing, and the fact that certainly the retail activity has changed, but so has how we live and our habitation aspect. Just as an opening question, would you accept that the current legislation certainly is failing, and that there is an ongoing issue with dereliction that leads to dilapidation, and that change is required? Would that be something that you would
most certainly
agree with?
Yes. We get building control notices for dangerous buildings. If you've, I've had notices before where chimneys are dangerous, and building control through the City Hall can issue a notice to fix the derelict building, or if there's a gutter hanging off. So some of it is there for the dangerous structures, but it wouldn't have the facility to make us renovate and put new windows and everything in. So the dangerous bit is dealt with. It's not as lacking as it was suggested in the introduction here.
One of the things that worries me about the existing legislation and even this bill, it's not that I don't think it goes far enough, because the opening gambit of this legislation is a council may, so it's not mandatory that a council, it's going to be open to interpretation. Now, they will have the powers to act if they choose to use them. Dairmid, you talked about the interpretation, I think, about of amenity, because I'm not sure it is as subjective as you would say that it is. And I'm happy if you could explain that a wee bit further, because I think from my aspect of if I look at it from a retail perspective, or more recently I've had a gentleman in my office who has a house in Limavady where for 35 years the neighbouring property has been derelict and fallen into dilapidation with a significant loss of amenity to his living conditions, the value of his house. And similarly, I'm from Lisburn. I've used the example of Bridge Street in Lisburn, where a significant investment was made probably to about 80% of the properties. But because of issues like probate or a reluctant landlord, some structures have remained to be beyond dangerous, and the council have found it very, very, very difficult to act in those occasions. So there was the risk to public safety and also the absolute loss of amenity. But you're saying that the interpretation of amenity is...
I think my problem with it isn't where you have the more serious issues. You know, those are simple and very obvious. I think when you look at this bill, you say, look, you know, if somebody has graffiti on the side of their building, if somebody has a build-up of rubbish, you know, I mean, we've dealt with similar legislation for landlords, you know, in the university area, where obviously they have HMO legislation. We have had members who have said, look, you know, there's a build-up of leaves in my front forecourt area, and they've been served on a notice. That is something which, to my mind, it's a very minor impact, but would that fall under amenity? It's those sort of issues. When you get further up the scale, no, I agree with you entirely. It's for that very minimal thing. I mean, currently, you know, HMO landlords, if graffiti's put on the side of the property, they've got to deal with it, but not just once or twice or 3 times, again and again and again. And it's for those sort of issues I'm considering more so than further up the line where, yes, I accept what you're saying. Totally.
That makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that because... and then there was another one there then... about, I thought this was interesting because I didn't think this was something that I think this is something as we should, it was the exceptional circumstances that might exist because as Robert maybe pointed out, I think it was Robert maybe, that the ownership of a property and the ability to effect a remedy isn't linear. But so in terms of those exceptional circumstances that might exist, outside of the probate, outside of maybe the legal aspect, are there any that you've come across that might...
Well, I mean Richard looks after and can speak better in connection with, you know, church properties. You know, with trustees, obviously in instances, you know, where trustees are saying, like, yes, I'm the trustee of this property. Derelict churches, you know, repurposing them. It's very difficult for anybody to take on that, what would now become a very onerous obligation. So I think, as I say, as long as there's some sort of discretion to say there are exceptional circumstances where at least, you know, the council have the ability to be able to make a different decision. As I say, with other legislation, they're saying, look, I'm sorry, the bill's quite clear, you know, this is what we have to do. We don't have any discretion. And I just think that, I think really every bill should have a discretion applied to it.
Just so the discretion wouldn't extend to the point where there would be a do nothing wouldn't be an option. I can't think of a precedent where do nothing would be a get out. I'm not sure. I really do understand this trustee and the carrying of the risk. I do get that. Yeah. But in terms of the remedy, and someone talked about what does the remedy look like? Does it look like boarding up, or does it mean like for like replacement? And it's a really good avenue to go that I think needs examined, and so councils need to know what's a reasonable ask. I would suspect. I think you said if a roof's missing, does it need a roof? But that beyond that, what does it need? Because it's impossible to have it, you know, to get a tenant, for instance, and if it's a high street. And the other thing I think that you rightly point out is that this. It's not going to be, but it should be linked to like a high street task force. It should be linked to a wider property strategy of how we live. I'm not so content about repurposing every shop for HMOs or flats, like one-bedroom apartments and stuff, because I think that's the wrong.
But would you not agree that, you know, especially in rural areas where there are enormous housing issues, that a vacant shop in the middle of a street, which, you know, people are now internet shopping and supermarket shopping, there isn't going to be very unlikely to be a possible user for it. If that was turned into 2 one-bedroom flats as a single house, you know, it's not going to pay a landlord to spend, or any property owner to spend the money to do that up as a single home. If they can spend a little bit more to create 2 units, then there's an economic return, there's a viability for them to do it, and at the same time it also creates 2 units of accommodation for folk in that area where there isn't sufficient housing. I just think it's something that should be explored.
I'm going to finish out doing this one. I mean, I think that one already exists because it happens in Bridge Street where I have my office. I mean, that was a thriving reasonably thriving about 100 years ago, I suppose. But it was all shops, and they obviously look for a remedy through repurposing the use of the property, and it happens. But the difficulty then is it impacts on the retail offering too. The less shops there is, the less chance there is for a good retail offering. So balance is important. But I don't think it's off. I don't think it's out of this bill. Doesn't move that out of the realms of possibility. To be fair.
Well, I think our suggestion was, that there would actually be an added aspect, that an enhancement to give you a better opportunity to be able to repurpose the building.
Okay. I'm just going to bring members in now, if that's okay. Thank you very much for your answers, John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Say to the panel, look, I'm really grateful for the engagement and take on board the points you've raised, and especially I think some of the comments you've made around 14-day deadlines in the business world. That's a very short turnaround, and you'd be hard pushed to get a government department to turn around lots of things within 14 days. So we'll make that point now, because I'm sure it'll be made again. However, I think that in term, we have a number of conversations with representative bodies and others in this regard, and I think we're falling into the trap of generalising. That perfectly understandable that happens. There would be a multiple of individual circumstances where properties become derelict. Not all of them are landlords waiting to convert a property into apartments. Not all are trustees. Not all are somebody who inherited an old house and now lives in Australia. But all of those are examples that I can think of in my own area. So I hope you don't mind me playing devil's advocate a bit with some of the points that have been raised. For example, you raised the issue of the costs of converting into a single-family home. And the issue of single-family home was dealt with quite extensively there. Could you tell me what would the cheaper comparison be there? Surely there's a greater cost between a single-family home conversion and apartments or HMOs. We are actually talking here about the sellability of the property and the profitability. And when we get into profitability, would you accept, therefore, that grant aid is maybe a difficult area, because grant aiding a profitable exercise is probably not what taxpayers want government to do?
I have found from my own experience, from my own family home, which was vandalised, set on fire. In the end, even though I have planning permission, it was cheaper to knock it down. And it's now sitting for the last 7 years as a vacant site. I see that all around where I work in BT7 and BT9. I see Shaftesbury Square, commercial buildings, the old DHS office, sitting there for 30 years, blighted. Visitors come to our city on the way up from the city to the university are passing this eyesore. I see it in houses beside my properties in Wolsey Street and on Tates Avenue, where they're sitting derelict on main thoroughfares. And the cheapest option for a landowner that he is of a derelict house is simply to knock it down, which just causes more blight.
It normally leaves the front wall. When they say it's knocked down, it's normally the front wall. To get a satisfactory long-term solution, conversions, if you like, are not very desirable. You're better putting the thing properly down to current regulations, and that requires it to be essentially rebuilt. And the benefits of doing that, not only for the man himself who owns it, but for the neighbours, are outstanding. I mean, I have a property where there's a derelict next door, and I have trouble with rats and coming from the derelict to affect my property. And there are others, I know there are dozens others in the same way. Let's get these properties rebuilt, particularly infills in terraced properties. Let's get them rebuilt.
John, can I answer two of your questions there? Sorry. One of the ones you said, if you were given a grant and property's been sold on, I'm old enough to remember the old urban development grants, and effectively, it was all about levering money from the property owner as well. And as I say, and if it was sold within a certain period of time, there was a clawback. So I think that, whether you extend the period of time for the clawback if it's sold, that's always an option. if you're turning a property, just doing it up as a single home, then you've got one rental income coming from it. The cost to repurpose a building in 2 flats rather than a single home is probably, less than 1.5 times the cost of doing it as a single home, but you've doubled the income. Because they say you reach a maximum amount that you would get for rental income, and if you want to bring properties back, there has to be some incentive to the landlord. As we've said here, it isn't advantageous to anybody if the landlord's option is to knock this down and you then have a gap-toothed frontage. We have to get them to have a reason to be able to spend the money and to do it in a sustainable fashion that it will maintain indefinitely. Not that it's going to be, well, what's the cheapest I can do this for, because I'm still going to have no money coming in from it.
Yep.
There has to be some carrot to go with the stick.
I get that, and I think you've answered that bit of my question where I was trying to ask, what are you comparing a single replacement house to? And the answer is apartments, for all of the answers and the planning arguments that come with it. And there is a demand for that, and I know that from my own constituency. But given that, you've listed a number of examples here: planning delays, probate delays, and we know all of those are reasons that I mentioned myself, the great nephew in Australia, and all of these are real examples. But there is also, isn't there, the example of people deliberately leaving a property vacant. You seem to have experienced it next door to your own properties, going by what you said there. And therefore, that's why the legislation is required and required urgently, because all of us around this table have had constituents who have a derelict or dangerous property and glass on the pavement, slates coming off the roof at risk to public safety. So for that reason, the legislation is required. But you would accept there's deliberate abandonment almost of properties until they become more profitable?
I think the problem is that if somebody owns a derelict property and they have a notice served on them, ideally this is an asset that they want to have bringing in money. They want a return from it. The problem is that they can't borrow the money from whatever lending institution because the figures don't add up. And therefore, as I say, yes, while you're going to serve the notice, and there are instances, as you've explained there, slits coming off the roof and glass, absolutely that requires attention. I don't think any landlord, or very few landlords or property owners, would actually want to put themselves in that position. They have an asset here, there's a value attached to it, they want to bring it back into use. The problem is that the figures have to add up for them to be able to do so. And if there's a relaxation in planning where you can create several housing units, I think that is the key, because everybody needs housing. I don't think there's any rural town or city in the province that is saying, listen, we don't have enough housing and this is an opportunity to try to bring that back, and the amenity value of the site is improved. You've brought it back. Once you bring it back once, that should be it forever. It should be sustainable because the rent it can bring in. The problem is that unless you can give a viable use to the property owner where they can get a return, they're going to spend the least amount they can.
Okay. Sure.
Sorry, bearing in mind, just to add that these people have an annual bill in the form of the rates. They get rates on them. Now, I think if it's roofless, I don't think they pay rates, but most of these buildings that do it, they are paying annual rates, and they think that that's more economic for them rather than bringing out 150 to 200,000 to rehabilitate this property. And they find out when they do it, it won't match the expenditure. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Could I
just wanted to come in on
just one wee point? Just give us time to develop a scheme. Look at the Tribeca scheme in North Street in Belfast. 500 million. Are you going to serve notices on them? Give them 14 days because they've been negotiating with the City Council for 5 years now, maybe longer, whether it was going to be retail, offices, whatever. These schemes, you can't do anything in 14 days. Give us a warning notice, engage with us before it happens, the councils, let us make our points, and then don't hit us with a hammer, because everything takes a long time with property. There just doesn't seem to be the understanding of that in this bill, how long it takes to develop a scheme. But Rebecca's a case
Very quick, sir.
There's one. I'll bring it there again. There's one aspect of the bill I'm not sure if you seem to be well read on it, but there is a pre-warning discussion that is triggered, that should be triggered before any letters or letters are issued. And in my so certainly in my, is it your experience that the legislation at the moment leads to the difficulties? Because what I see in the street and what I see in terms of that dilapidation is the powers certainly don't exist, particularly around the loss of amenity. Okay. And I think that's reasonably given. From my assessment so far of this, a wee bit like pre-application discussions, that a council should engage in a pre-warning discussion. And a pre-warning discussion, I imagine, and it should be reflected, by the way, in the guidance, I would accept this, that a reasonable time frame and an agreed way forward. My difficulty in the past has been not the interpretation of the discussions, but for instance, when you get a building which is maybe 100 years old or something like that, and you maybe get a structural engineer's report to say that this building should be knocked down, you get another structural engineer that comes in and says no, it can't be. And then you get stuck, absolutely stuck, with two expert opinions. And so we bit like people employ lawyers. We all use the data in a different way, but we need to get past it. We do need to find a way of getting past that. But this is an opportunity, and the good thing is we're at the point in the discussion of the development of the legislation where concerns can be raised and acted on. But to go back to my first point, is it not your reading that a pre-warning discussion takes place before any letter is issued, and then therefore, if that is the case, that kind of should take care of the time periods for the warning letters?
I think one of the problems is, that the time periods, as we've said, the time periods aren't sufficient. All of us will be having issues trying to get contractors to carry out roofing works and whatever. From the point of view, contractors are saying, listen, I can do that in January, I can do that 3 months down the line. It's absolutely impossible to do anything other than the most basic of items within that 14 days. You've said yourself there, trying to get a structural engineer's report, you won't have that in 14 days. So I think if there is discussions beforehand, there needs to be an acceptance, that, as I say, if we are going to serve some sort of notice, you need to be given an opportunity to deal with it.
I think that would also need to, so I imagine that would, the development of any guidance or regulation there also needs to have a time. I think you're right, by the way, because even getting tradespeople these days is almost impossible. Especially when you get down to stonework, or you're looking wooden handmade windows, or whatever it is. Those are all really difficult things. So the test of reasonableness needs to apply to council as well, and officers. I accept that. But I think, would it be reasonable? Would you accept that in the pre-warning discussion, that similarly a time frame for response is reasonable? Because if it's left open-ended, then it never.
I think that's reasonable, Chair. I think that's reasonable to say.
So obviously, you're concentrating, and rightly so, on the 7-day and the 14-day and the 28th day, which is your written notices and your time to response, your time to lodge an appeal. But before that, in terms of the pre-warning discussion, which would happen with a council official, I imagine, that in there still needs to be a time to respond and agree the way forward. That can't be left open-ended, because therefore you never get to the actual warning.
I'm involved in Ballyfy Church near my road, on the periphery of that. It's taken, I think, 4 years. The builder started last month. They get planning through. It's taken 4 years to get that. So we have a phase 2, which involves building housing as well. That could take another 3 or 4 years. The planning system, and we understand the planning with wastewater and how you deal with it. We have problems which is not the fault of the property owner in this case, a problem of society at large. We haven't paid for what we should have been paying for the last 10 years.
There should be no jeopardy. So once a plan's agreed, if a plan's agreed in the pre-warning discussions, and I'm sure all of the MLAs have been in touch with councils in regard to delays in planning. In fact, it's one of our hot topics for a different reason, that there are log jams, and different councils are performing at different speeds and rates. And I would agree with you that if it's a planning issue, that it should not, that is no fault to the landlord, But if planning has been applied and agreed, that's different. But if it's the council's fault, that's their jeopardy then.
Well, it gets back to saying his discretion. There should be built in the opportunity for the council to exercise discretion in certain circumstances. Without naming specific circumstances, that just ability to be able to exercise their discretion should be applied.
The grounds for appeal under this section 5 can only be brought on specific grounds, and there are 5 of them. Planning's not in there. The fact that maybe you've served it on the wrong person. I mean, an interest in the land, for instance, the building society could have an interest in land. Are you going to serve a notice on the nationwide if that's the only one you can find that they've got a mortgage? There are other people with interest. I think it's too prescriptive, the grounds for appeal. I'd want more flexibility in there.
We certainly can look at that piece. Okay, John, you wanted to come in on this one just before we move on?
Very quick one. It's kind of been answered. We've been more specific about which areas of this we're talking about. I'm going to caution, though, that I would be careful about asking processes to be quicker at one end to avoid your 4-year wait, Richard, and then at the same time asking them to be longer at the other end. It's very contradictory to do that. Would you agree, for example, and I'm trying to define a reason for the committee to form an opinion here, 14 days as a time frame could include someone being on holiday, a professional advisor, an architect, a solicitor, whoever, simply being on holiday for 2 or 3 weeks and therefore slightly longer. 28 days, that was pretty standard in government process.
I do feel sometimes that they copy and paste the standard, and yet because property takes so much longer, there are other things that happen in society, and 14 days, 28 days is apt. Property is a particular problem in that everything takes so long. I nearly think we should be extending those to maybe 3 months. These things have been lying vacant for years in most cases. So a much longer time for reports, builders, etc. I think so, 3-6 months even, rather than just.
It maybe depends on the extent of the problem. You know, and if something's dangerous, well, it has to be dealt with straight away, and that's what it is. But as I say, and it gets back to what we said, about the amenity. If there's some graffiti on the side of a building or a build-up of rubbish, that's not something that needs to be dealt with in 14 days. As I said, now, if there's a build-up of asbestos, that's more important, and that needs, I just think discretion needs to be applied, so that, as I say, in different circumstances, the council's hands aren't absolutely tied. There's that flexibility built into it. They're still in charge, but it gives them the flexibility.
There has to be a common sense approach.
Yes, absolutely.
But once getting the remedy agreed is critical, and agreeing those timeframes. Okay, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. And again, this issue has been touched on right throughout the conversation, and that's planning. Now, do you believe that the planning difficulties with plannings and the problems that there is getting planning has led to the situation we have today with all of the vacant buildings? For example, somebody looking for planning, it takes them that long to get it. They can't get, if they want to change from 1 to 2 flats in a sense, they can't get access out onto the footpath for the two things, then they don't get it. That has turned a lot of people off, and that is the reason that we're in the situation with so many vacant buildings. Now, do you believe that unless there's a bit of freeing up and planning, that it'll be difficult to implement a lot of this within this bill here?
Couldn't agree more with your statement. Couldn't agree more with your statement.
And some of those big houses that they want, that we can only get planning for to make them back into reinstate to a big 6 or 7 bedroomed house, they have no amenity area at the back. No, we couldn't even sell them if it's a 5 or 6 bedroomed house with a wee yard 6 foot by 5 at the back. Everybody with that size of a family now wants a wee bit of open space. There's not even a market for them. Even if so, they're far better converted to smaller units. But the planners won't let us.
Yeah. What changes do you need to see to planning in order to allow this to progress?
You need a deadline on like the way it is in London, where if the planners don't make a decision within 12 weeks, you get your planning and you get a refund of your fee. There needs to be something to speed up the planning process. Planning 4 years, if at all. There's probably as spotted, which would make an excellent apartments, two bedroom apartments for families. But I know I'll not get planning use because it's a large 3-storey building. It's on a main road which happens to overlap with a HMO, old HMO policy area I call the HMO management area. And because the planners in Belfast, or the council in Belfast, have adopted the guidance of a new rule called House 10, HOU 10, there's no intensification allowed in that area. But intensification in our inner cities is what we need to keep the inner cities alive. Because there is no such thing as a large family who want to live in an old 100-year-old house with no front or no back garden. They want to live in nice purpose-built houses, well insulated, like what the housing associations and developers are providing. So what are we going to do with all these buildings? We can't get planning permission. It isn't economical for us to put them back into single uses as a family, because the family don't want them. The only option is to convert them into what's needed, which is 2-bedroom, 3-person homes, which is what the demand is, or 1-bedroom homes, which housing associations have, our advisors have told me that they don't really want one-bedroom units. The need is for 2-bedroom, 3-person homes for somebody to be able to be looked after in old age with a car maybe living in. So that is what's needed. Yet we are being hampered totally by. I see properties every week which I could go in and develop, and I could make money on it someday, right? But more importantly, I could turn these properties in, which are often beside my other properties and causing me problems. But I can't get planning permission. I'm wasting my time even thinking of going for planning permission, wasting my money and my time, and it'll take forever. So we need something to speed up maybe fast track it for any building served with a notice or being highlighted. Let's get the planners in and say, can we fast track this? And do something that's needed. I know I'm from the city, but in small towns, people like my father is from Muscrever, and I was talking to one of my family, and it says our kids can't afford to live here anymore because it's got such a nice area, and our children can't even afford to live in the town. Why not get the old butcher shop, turn it into a couple of flats? And let the population, let the town grow and develop, instead of having people exit into the cities.
Yeah, so flexibility in planning is key in moving this bill forward. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Tom. Okay, members, any other questions for the witnesses? Enough? Okay, that was a really good session. It was very informative, and thank you for taking the questions so well, and we will certainly use that in our deliberations and scrutiny of the bill as it comes forward. Are there any final comments that you want to make before?
No, just to thank you, Chair. As you know, we're not used to appearing in front of
You did very well.
And I must say you've done very well yourselves here. I mean, it's quite surprising the knowledge and the commitment that your committee has to this subject. It's wonderful to see it.
Thank you.
We would love you to use our knowledge if you can. If you want, we would love to engage further if we can help.
I appreciate that.
We all want the same thing.
Well, when we look at this and we're working through the clauses and stuff, it may be that we call on you again, if that's okay. And if there's anything else that you assess through this, feel free to fire it through to the team here. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, members.
Very good. Nice stuff.
Okay, members, it's now agenda item 7, and we're staying on track with. Sorry,
just before we move on there, I think maybe it would be perhaps prudent to invite Nilga and Solace maybe to the committee, because obviously local government has come up a lot of times, and it'd be worthwhile to hear from them as to how they think the bill might operate in practice at local government level.
I think that would be a really good idea. We did ask them, and they said no.
Maybe ask again.
Well, I'd be honest. We can call for witnesses, and I would think that we absolutely should have a representation from both Nilga and Solace. So could be.
I think so, just because the kind of local, there's such a big stakeholder in this, Robbie.
Disconnect would be unforgivable if we didn't press the test, and I think we need to press the test on this one, Declan, so I do agree.
Yeah.
So we will ask them more firmly if they would like to attend.
Have they ever provided any written submissions or evidence at all to date?
Nilga and Sola?
Nilga.
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
And Declan, yeah? No, thank you for raising it.
Redistribute the written evidence that they've sent in to members just on the back.
Yeah, I could do on the back of Anya's piece. Okay. Okay, thank you. Members, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Leif is on there. Okay, we do have quorum. Agenda item 7 is the Dilapidation Bill oral evidence session from the Royal Society of Ulster Architects, otherwise known as RSUA. I refer members to the pack, starting at page 92 for the briefing paper and details from RSUA and their views on the bill. So I welcome the following representatives to give their evidence to the committee and answer any questions. We have Mr Ciarán Fox, who is the Director, Mr Curtis Large, Policy and Public Affairs Officer, and Mr Colin Shaw, RSUA Member. Thank you very much for your attendance. So when you're ready and comfortable enough to give us your presentation, please do so.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation along today, and I'll keep the opening words as short as possible to leave as much time for questions. Colin here is an architect but also a member of RSUA. He's a director of the Belfast-based practice Tigers, and Colin was part of the working group that put together RSUA's response to the bill, and Curtis, our Policy and Public Affairs Officer, has coordinated and drafted that response, and we'll be able to take some of the more detailed questions on our submission. So RSUA is the representative body for architecture in Northern Ireland. We're the professional body with about 850 chartered architects in Northern Ireland. We're set up as a charity, and therefore our whole drive is how we can assist the public in gaining the benefits from architecture. And that's the lens through which we approach every bit of legislation, every bit of policy. How can architecture help improve society here in Northern Ireland? In terms of the Dilapidation Bill, our overall response is that we are very welcome of this bill coming forward. It's a very positive step. We see it importantly as part of a wider package of measures. Anything like this, trying to tackle a really tricky problem, very rarely solved with one move. And this doesn't work on its own. Very welcome news yesterday to hear from the Finance Minister about the non-domestic vacant rates. Certainly we had been arguing that it was important that empty properties were not free of rates or reduced rates, and there's a move now. I think the direction of travel is to move it to 100% rates for those empty properties. We also see the circular economy strategy being finalised, about to go forward to the Minister for Economy. One of the 3 key areas there is construction, and there's no better way to really boost circular economy in Northern Ireland better than retaining our existing buildings, keeping them in use. It's one of the most important things we can do. In terms of planning, Department for Infrastructure, really important role in terms of how we retain our existing buildings and make best use of them. We're meeting the Chief Planner next week. And then finally, and there are others, but DFC obviously have a very important role, communities here, in terms of regeneration and the potential for grant making around that to support those who want to bring buildings back into use or retain buildings, to support those in doing so. Overall, this is focused on 2 very connected but distinct things. It's about keeping buildings in good order and also incentivising their active use. And as I've mentioned there's a whole pile of departments involved and, of course, councils. Our view is that one of the biggest challenges is coordinating all of these things, all of these different policy areas, different actors. And unlike in other jurisdictions, councils here have limited powers, particularly with regard to regeneration. And it's our view that what's missing locally is the role of the city architect and council architect. It's a role which is well established across Europe and has been very effective in providing that coordination. In the same way as an architect on an individual project coordinates all of the different disciplines that go to making up the complete finished building and dealing with many different factors, the idea of a city or council architect is something similar, except at that town, village or city scale. It's something that we'll certainly be seeking support across government and councils over the next number of years to have that role introduced. In terms of the timescale for the movement of the bill, we met the Minister, I think it was roughly about 12 months ago, and we were of the understanding that the bill was due at the early part of 26. It was delayed a little bit, and now we're going into the committee stage, and we know that that has been pushed out to May of 26, and we are slightly concerned about just the pace of the progress. However, I should stress it is important, more important indeed, to get it right. Anything that can be done to keep things moving, great, but very important to get it right. And ultimately, our view is that there's no point having new powers created that are not used because they're too difficult to understand, they're too costly to put into action, or that they have potentially some negative consequences. One of the things that we welcome most about this bill coming forward is that it really reinforces the point that there's a responsibility that comes with owning a building. And that's something maybe that isn't always fully appreciated. It's not just a private property. It has a consequence for the community. And that is very strong in this piece of legislation. We need to be careful though, and one thing I would flag up, we need to be careful that we don't encourage demolition. And it's something that I'm not sure how well that has been handled at this stage. And you can understand that if somebody is told that they must spend X thousands of pounds on a project, and the easier thing, if it's not listed or it's not in a protected area, is to take that building down, you can see why very quickly, maybe even overnight, that building will come down. And that is not a positive in the grand scale for what we're trying to achieve around climate change and regeneration. The last thing we want is lots of derelict sites rather than derelict buildings. In terms of some of the specifics in the legislation, in our response we've made it clear that we need increased or enhanced definition around various elements, and whether that's provided in the legislation or through guidance. We understand that guidance work has been undertaken by the department. We haven't seen that yet, but we'd be very happy to provide feedback if that guidance document does become public. The right to appeal, which is embedded in the bill, we 100% acknowledge the need for that. However, we want to ensure that it is not so easy to appeal that it becomes the sort of first step almost. It should be the last resort. And it's just important that things are structured in a way, not that it shouldn't be made too easy. Of course, there needs to be a very straightforward right to appeal, but we don't want things getting bogged down in the courts. We've seen that in other areas, and it certainly doesn't serve anybody other than the people who make money out of things going to court. In terms of keeping track of the scale of the problem and how we're progressing, at the moment in Northern Ireland we do have the Heritage at Risk Register. Of course, that is only focused on heritage buildings. We believe it would be very useful to adopt a similar approach, extend it maybe, to look at a record of derelict, dilapidated buildings. If we don't know the scale of the problem, it's very hard to understand what's going to happen whenever this legislation comes in. And also perhaps there's a role for the public in being able to add to that list, or at least recommend for addition to that list. The idea that the people who live in an area tend to know what needs to happen, and allowing the public to raise their hand and say, there's a building near us which is bringing the area down, it is not being well maintained, it is potentially going to pose a risk. There should be a way of that being flagged up. And then to finish, stronger fixed penalties we believe would be useful. £500 is at the very low end. In terms of how much it costs, for any of you who ever done building work in recent times, the idea of £500 being a penalty that might make you not undertake some building works, which are likely to cost thousands of pounds, it doesn't feel like the gentle nudge that you really need. And perhaps if there's a real desire to keep it at that, there should be a very clear ramping up if action is not taken quickly. And finally, we believe that the legislation needs to be supported with the signposting of support. Most people want to do the right thing. Most people who own buildings want to do the right thing. They want to keep their building in good nick. Sometimes circumstances make it very difficult for them to do so. And therefore it's important that people are not in any way vilified for a building falling into disrepair, but that they are supported to bring it back into a decent shape. And where there are grants available, where there are loans available, or even advice available, that should be provided to people as notices are served, so that there's a sense of, yes, action needs to be taken, but there are supports available. And that's a quick summary of our position. I'm very happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's very good. So some of the points that you've covered in your submission, and even since is chimed with the last set of witnesses, and some of it maybe not so much. I think you raised very, very pertinent and important issues. There's one there that I just want to tease out first of all, if that's okay, and it's, my computer's frozen, but it's in the interpretation of amenity, and you detail the clauses there, 1, 4, 7 and 11. And I think you're calling for the same response as the previous witnesses in regard to the interpretation of amenity. And I think it's really important, because I think amenity is hugely important. And I would like to see that bottomed out. Have you guys got any suggestions in regard to either the four that you've picked out? Because you've got detriment to local amenity, serious detriment to local amenity, dangerous structure, and then prejudicial to health or nuisance. Because the settings are quite different. If it's residential, if it's retail, if it's rural, what does loss of amenity actually look like in those circumstances? That we can reduce the risk of it being open to interpretation. If you could help with that.
Curtis, maybe from the group, was there any sort of initial feedback?
I can't think of anything specific, but one of the kind of interesting points from that session was that we understood and appreciated that the department, or rather the committee, was consulting on what these definitions should mean. So we wouldn't expect to see them in the legislation at this moment in time, but the operating outcome of that conversation was, well, we know that these notices are graded by level of seriousness in terms of the dilapidation. We would like to see, even on a general level, potential recommendations for remedial works graded based on the level of severity of dilapidation. So, as I say, we know that the committee is consulting on it at the moment. And I don't know, Colin, do you have any thoughts on? Yes.
We should be nailing this more to what's already in existence elsewhere in the UK. What we're trying to get through is a bill that is possibly 95% similar to what is available in England, Scotland, Wales, and then just form it slightly, that last 5%, to be more specific to the province. We know who we are. We know what we have. We're unique in that respect, but the definitions of what means dilapidation, dangerous structures, etc., must surely be available elsewhere in the UK for other legislation.
I'll take this out a wee bit further, because I think the definition of amenity isn't as subjective as some people think it might be. And the example they'll give you is a gentleman who's already visited me, who has a property in Limavady, and it's a residential property, but the neighbouring property has been derelict. Not so much dilapidated, but derelict for 35 years, and it's in a process of dilapidation. And the loss to amenity there is loss of property value for him, increased unwanted rodents and visitors, whether that's birds. And we know that we're lacking in legislation even around the area, so not so much the building, but say a huge tree that encroaches on other properties and then poses other significant dangers. Do you think this is the opportunity to batten down a little bit firmer on what that loss of amenity might mean?
Yeah.
That it's not a subjective.
Absolutely, and that's where what we were hoping was that the guidance would come out from the department that would accompany the legislation, and then would be able to give feedback as to whether we feel it is defined that sufficiently.
Yes.
It's almost easier to start with somebody's first best attempt at what that might look like, and then to be able to give feedback on it. And ideally that would not happen after the legislation, that it would be done in parallel with But I mean, the example you give there, it's hard for, I think, anyone to say that that's not having a detrimental impact on the community. And the community can be one house in the sense that that is somebody else's property is creating a nuisance. It might be quite often, certainly in more urban areas, it's the dilapidated building that then starts to get used as a place for teenagers to go drinking. And that's not what the neighbour wants. And how do you then take action? Who do you go to get action taken? Immediately, is that impacting on people? I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. And it's how we make sure that it doesn't get lost in the process as we go through.
Yeah. No problem. I'm just going to read this out because it's in terms of there is a bit of a definition in here in terms of the additional text with the bill. It is the guidance in the context of the term amenity is used in its broadest sense and covers community issues such as neighbourhood safety and security and the care, maintenance and preservation of the local environment. And I'm sorry to go back to the previous witnesses, but they did raise reasonable concerns. Is that, for instance, if you're a property owner and graffiti is sprayed on and you've no control over that, I'm not sure that this bill will look at that level of loss of amenity, but at the same time, that's why the definition needs to be important, that we don't have zealous officials interpreting it in a certain way, and that's why I think it's keen, as you had rightly pointed out, Ciarán, if the regulation guidance is there with the bill, even if it's going to be changed rather than, because as it says here, it's in its broadest term, but from my perspective, the risk here is that councils will act totally differently. You will get an official who will work zealously, and then you'll get a very relaxed, and then you have the discrepancy in council areas and neighbouring jurisdictions, which is not a good...
To be honest, I mean, there's to some extent, I would say, a little bit of an inevitability that whenever this comes in and councils are given the role of actually enacting it, that there will be differences. I mean, ever since, for as long as I can remember, building control has been with councils, and building control, the approach in every council is slightly different. And there's been attempts at trying to bring that, some degree of consistency, but it's difficult whenever it's not mandated. So I think it works reasonably well still, and that people get to know what the level is. And ultimately, if a member of the public is concerned that there is either a council that is being overzealous in its application of the law, or is interpreting it in a too limited way, there is recourse to go directly to their councillors. And that's the democratic process to say, this isn't working. Why in our council area is this not considered a problem? Yet just down the road in the other council area, it seems to be that action is taken. So there's that balance always. My view would be, wouldn't it be great to get this up and running rather than trying to have everything absolutely settled and then accept that there may need to be tweaks in terms of the implementation. But from where we are today, there is no doubt at all that we need to take a big step forward, and let's not hold back on taking that step to get everything absolutely locked down.
One last one before I move on, because I know there's a number of members are interested here. There is a slight difference in regard to the attitudes from stakeholders in regard to the appeals process and the notice periods, and I think your position is that some of them are too long, and that's not universally held position, shall we say? Yeah. Could you quantify that a little bit better for us, so that we would have your evidence in regards to why you think that, for instance, the 28 days for appeals for the maintenance and in respect of that?
It's more that it comes back to that point of how easy is it and how do you delay, and if you're allowed your 28 days and on the 20th day, so this is a problem that it's the council have already decided this is a problem, and you wait for 28 days, nothing happens. So effectively a month passes, the problem persists, and then you put in your appeal, and then the clock starts ticking. Now, there's maybe a way of having a gradation where for the very serious cases you get 7 days to appeal because something needs to happen. Maybe for the less important cases you can have a longer period of time. But there's something that, you've seen it in other areas of public life where you have 28 days, people will max it out and then they'll start the process, and then whatever the next part is, there'll be another 28 days. Suddenly 3 months has passed. And what can that lead to? It can, first of all, the problem persists, but it can also, in building terms, lead to worsening, particularly in those more critical ones. So our response is like let's say it's the first level response. The more complex way might be to have that level of, for the really serious stuff, there needs to be action taken. And if you're served notice, is it reasonable that you come back within 7 days and say, no, we don't think that's right? I mean, if it's going to impact on the community in a significant way, it seems in my mind to be appropriate that action need to be taken, and perhaps for those less serious ones, where, for example, if it's graffiti, everyone knows it's best for graffiti to be removed within 24 hours. Now, is it good for that to be there for 3 months? What does that say? What does that say to the wider community? It says it's not really that important. It's okay for graffiti to stay here for 3 months. Someone put an appeal in, they couldn't be bothered taking it off the building. Now, is there a balance there because the cost of cleaning that up is so small that perhaps, again, there needs to be a way of that being handled rather than something which costs, thousands of pounds to remediate? That for me is where, do we need to have all of that agreed at this stage of getting the legislation through? Perhaps not, but maybe we give the scope within the legislation for different tiers to be set.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's important to get a feel for that, because your point at the start is that this won't be rushed legislation. I don't feel. I think this committee will have done their deliberations way in advance of me, by the way. But there's a real interest in this committee in that. But we need to make sure that the legislation is good legislation and not rushed, and that's the balance that needs to be struck. I actually agree on a personal level with your regard in terms of some common sense approach to both the fines, where £500 perhaps isn't enough, but what I would think is that it could be a graduated. I mean, £500 probably is a good starting point, but a graduated for non-compliance after that, I think we could make more common sense. And similarly, as you've rightly pointed out, in terms of those notice common sense approaches, but that goes back to the amenity piece. What has been lost and what's the risk?
We're covering such a wide ground here, and sometimes, I love talking about examples, the real things that happen. And you mentioned about graffiti, and there's also, what about if a wall is looking like it might fall down, or the roof? I mean, big thing for buildings is if you get water into a building, the speed of degradation is very fast. Now, it might cost thousands of pounds to fix that. Even just getting scaffolding up and all the rest these days, it will cost a lot of money. So there is you're kind of dealing on one hand with something which could be maybe fixed really quickly and it would be very cheap to fix. On the other hand, something might cost thousands of pounds. So trying to have one blanket rule for that is really, really difficult. Yeah. Because if most people most people act logically in these situations. If something costs you £30,000 to fix and the fine's £500, pay the fine. If you're not that interested in the building, pay the fine, pay the next fine. Where's the balance come? Whereas if someone says, can you get that graffiti cleaned, otherwise you have to pay a £500 fine, the chances are the graffiti will be cleaned the very next day, because no one wants to pay £500 just to get the graffiti cleaned. So it's hard to try and have this all wrapped up in a bundle. But I suppose I would come back to Colin's point. We've got a model that we are clearly working to in terms of the legislation, which has been shown to work pretty well in other parts of the UK. Getting that in place and then maybe working around things a little bit. And the key thing is giving enough scope within the legislation for those more detailed things to be dealt with at maybe a council level.
Thank you. Okay, members. John?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all of the representatives as well. I'm getting keen to tease out a bit more if I can about the avoiding demolition and avoiding dilapidation as well. And I'm intrigued by some of what you said in that regard. I'm going to give, not too specific, a general example from real casework. I don't want to start identifying people, but you can imagine an old historic and listed corn mill, and a person trying to convert it into a home, and there's A, no help available, and then B, no consent forthcoming because the proposed building is too modern, nor is there in place any protection at all for what already exists, or anything to compel the owner to maintain it. So the historic building is literally crumbling into the ground in an attempt to save what remains of it is not being assisted by process or by government. So in relation to this and the many related examples to that there could be across the dilapidation piece, how do you feel, and sorry to put you on the spot on this one by the way, how do you feel, or can you give us any examples of where government can better collaborate in the context of this bill to make those things happen more speedily, first of all, and also more successfully?
Well, you probably have come across quite a few examples in your everyday work.
Yeah, a lot of my time is spent researching for clients who own such buildings as you've just cited. Grant funding, and there are lots and lots of various sources for grant funding available if we have to dig deep. And I'm doing a lot of projects that are actually just like you've described, where councils are providing schemes to allow owners to put a new roof on to save that building for the next 10 years or so. So it's all about money, and you can't force a person who owns an extremely dilapidated building to spend thousands and thousands of pounds. It would be nice to do that, but you can't do it. There has to be a carrot as opposed to a stick. And if the carrot is in the form of some form of grant funding, just enough money to tip it over into a project that is actually going to be cost effective for that person. That person could match fund it or pay another 100,000, another 20,000 is added in from a grant somewhere. That will allow that project to be delivered.
There are many areas that this committee would look at where there's a lot of talk about carrots and not always a lot of requests for stick, frankly. And there could be an analysis of that would be very interesting indeed. And not least of all, an analysis of those behind the various requests for carrots. The reality is, though, in relation, Colin, what you came back with there, is the reality then that there needs to be more consistency across councils where they're helping out on the restoration or renovation aspect of this? Yes. But more specifically, can you think of an example of better coordination within government departments that could make this bill successful? I'm thinking of, for example, DFC in relation to built heritage, DOF in relation to rates, income, and then, of course, DAERA in relation to the bill.
Yes. The schemes that I'm working on at the moment are, just to name a council, it's Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon Council. They have two interesting schemes. One is called Empty to Occupied and the other one is Fit for Future. Each scheme allows clients of buildings that have been in various states of disrepair or vacancy to apply for funding, to allow that funding just to ease the burden to bring that building back into ownership and or to occupation, and then rates will flow and it'll rejuvenate various town centres. And we're working through lots of, maybe something like 10 town centres in that council, and we're talking about maybe 50 properties that are benefiting from that, whereas if those two schemes weren't available, it wouldn't happen. So we see that as a real positive. Now, how Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon do it, I don't know. But they're the only council that I know of that have those particular schemes available. And it's not particularly easy to get the money because clients have to really line up and tick a lot of boxes, and there's a lot of red tape to go through, but it's there and it's working.
Just in terms of the particular situation you painted there, one of the big questions always is the building listed? And if you have a listed building, the next question is, did you purchase it when it was listed? Mm-hmm. And if you did, typically you've bought that fully understanding the responsibility and the limitations that places on what you will be able to do and the cost associated with that. Now, there are different situations which need to be handled better by government. Whenever a building is listed post-purchase, government has created a set of conditions on the owner of that building that not of their doing, and there needs to be much better support for the owner in that circumstance. Or the other one, which does happen quite often in terms of homes, is a listed building can be passed down through the family. And again, in that situation, someone has been effectively landed with a building that they did not ask for. However, it's now in their possession. In those situations, I think we need to have much better coordination and support. Slightly less so when someone's bought it full in the knowledge. Normally, if there's limitations, that will somewhat depress the price, and therefore it's kind of almost been factored in. In terms of the rating system, in our recent response to DOF, we did suggest that there needed to be a more intelligent approach to rating, which both encourage people to maintain their buildings, but also to get them back into use. And there's various details around that. We certainly got a good hearing. Another bit of coordination which would be really useful would be around, at times we do hear of slightly overzealous officials within HED in terms of we are very supportive of the Historic Environment Division of the Department for Communities in their work, but occasionally we do hear of demands being placed on building owners, and even there are at times the architect will come in with a proposal and HED will say no, you cannot do that, even though the architect is coming with oodles of conservation expertise and knowledge. And maybe we need planners to be a little braver at times and say we acknowledge the very useful advice from our HED colleagues. However, we are going to grant planning permission because in the grand scheme of the social environmental benefits, that this needs to proceed as proposed. So there's definitely work to be done in that area, and that's what we certainly see a lot of at the moment is a lack of anybody in that position to spearhead all of these different elements and bring them together. Coordinate all that,
Yeah, so that's one of the duties of a city architect or county architect.
Yeah. Indeed, yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and just to build on Colin's point about the money available within councils, we find also that there's money being made available at the executive level. So I think it was Shaping Sustainable Places was a scheme that DFC, DFI and DARA had consulted on together. And so from that point of view, we expected a reasonable degree of collaboration. And I also expected them to mention the dilapidation bill in the consultation document, and I was surprised to see it wasn't there. So, I mean, that's kind of evidence that maybe, the conversations aren't as collaborative as they should be.
And could be as we go through this process.
Exactly, and that's that's £165 million available over the next 10 years with councils chipping in as well. So
I'm particularly grateful before we close, Chair, if you don't mind, just for the points that were made, Ciarán, on your points on. You didn't use these words, but I'm going to. We need to be careful we don't consult this to death or scrutinise to death, because this is why we end up with nothing happening here. Talking about it for years and then no result comes out of it.
Joe, thank you very much. Any other questions, members? No. Thank you very much for your submission. And we do share the ambition for the legislation coming forward. And if you're minded, we may well ask you back as we get deeper into our deliberations. And if you turn anything else up, please do communicate with us. We will remain open, ears open and eyes open to what you've got to offer. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much
for your time. Thank you.
All the best. Thanks.
Okay, members. Are there any specific actions out of the two briefings that we've had before we move on to agenda item 8? I think we've pretty much I've covered that. The only action I can think of was one that Declan had suggested as again writing out to Nilga and Solus to get them in, because the impact here on councils is significant, and that is something that we can't be seen to neglect.
That's
okay?
That's fine. Just to mention, excuse me, just to mention at this stage, Chair, that the plan is just for our last meeting before Christmas is to provide a summary on the scrutiny so far, and it won't be clause by clause level of detail necessarily, but it will just who we've heard from, the broad themes that are emerging and so on. So there's a bit of a punctuation mark before the Christmas recess period around this scrutiny.
I think, I know councils don't really like the sound of it. I think they don't like the sound of it, but the city or town architect type or planner sort of with that remit, I think kind of works when you have such a risk with councils interpreting the whole blinking thing differently or having a different attitude to the application of it. So I think it's something we'll certainly be picking up again on. Okay, members. Agenda item 8 is the departmental written briefing, the update committee on the progress of the sustainable utilisation of livestock slurry, the SULS Phase 2. So members, I refer you to the pack starting at page 96 of the briefing paper from the Green Growth and Innovation Division regarding the progress of the Small Business Research Initiative on the SULS 2 project, Phase 2 project. You recall that we visited Blackliston, Houston Estates and Dundonald in June to see firsthand one of the SULS projects in action. Members, the briefing builds on the previous update we considered in May on the 2 ongoing individual projects, and discussions are continuing with a third company, and an update will be provided once contracts are signed. Project 1, which is the one that we visited, BHE, the Farm to Export project, develops a facility to produce a commercially viable biofertiliser, concentrate nutrients from farms at AD sites and exporting dried nutrient-rich digestate. To date, 65 farms have participated in the project, separating and transporting over 6,300 tonnes of solids, and the volume of biogas produced so far is in the region of 638,000 cubic metres. BHE has recently taken receipt of a SULS-funded mobile centrifuge separator, which will be operational after testing in December. Then Project 2 is the Centre for Competitiveness. The project is advancing well with preliminary results demonstrating significant progress with the gradual introduction of their SULS-funded mobile screw press separator from May. It's planned to start feeding a second partnering AD from Northampton Farms in late October-November, and on-farm AD operations are progressing with negotiations of long-term supply agreements with a small number of AD plants. To date, 25 farms have participated in on-farm separation, with 257 tonnes of slurry solids being removed from farms in Mid-Ulster, producing approximately 6,425 cubic metres of biogas. We were advised in the written briefing we considered our meeting on the 29th of May last year that contract negotiations were ongoing with the third company, and that was successful in obtaining funding for the project, and it appears that is still the case now. I appreciate that some elements are regarded as commercially sensitive, as the proposals involve the intellectual property of private organisations. However, with that in mind, given the target date of completion of Phase 2 of the project in September 2027, and as a key action within the Loughney report and action plan, I'm concerned that the delay in agreeing that contract, which is the third contract, so it may well be worthwhile asking the department for some further detail around this if members are content with that, and mindful that it is commercially sensitive. And have members any other comments in regard to the other 2 projects which we have some information on?
Yes, Chair, I appreciate it's commercially sensitive, but I suppose from like any of us, all of us who have been following the NAP proposals, including the stakeholder event last week, will realise that this is one of the important elements in the toolbox of the farming community to try and address whatever targets may come out of the revised NAP proposal. So I suppose what I would be saying is the department needs to upscale this at pace.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You've got this part of it, then you also have the 2030 deadline for slurry and how it's administered and so on. So I mean, these are going to be key to affecting the solutions and building confidence. So yeah, if you're minded, we will write to the department on the third project to get that update, because if it's in any way delayed, the knock-on for that could be significant. Okay, thank you. Okay, members. Agenda item 9, correspondence. I propose to deal with correspondence by exception. There's a correspondence memo for reference at page 200 of the pack, and I'm asking if members are content to note the correspondence as presented, and if members have any comments, I'll summarise the content of particular correspondence and open it up for comment. But before I do, just going to draw the committee's attention to page 205 of the pack, the correspondence we've been copied into from the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee to the Minister regarding concerns relating to veterinary medicine supply to Northern Ireland. As members noted last week, at our meeting, we expect to consider a written briefing on the matter from the Assembly EU Affairs Manager at next week's meeting, and Vet and I have also agreed to brief the committee on that day. There are 2 items of correspondence from individuals that, if members are content, the clerk will respond to on behalf of the committee, and the committee is not in a position to assist these correspondence at this point. Are members content? Is there anything that you want to draw the committee's attention to? No. Okay, members, and let me see, then we will be on 9.11, where I refer you to table papers. No, not actually, because we're going to do that by exception. Okay. Yep. Agenda item 10 then is the forward work programme. Members, I refer you to page 331 to 335 of the pack for the draft forward work programme, and we're expecting to add further detail following today's executive meeting. Are you content that it's published? Thank you, members. Any other business? Okay. Okay, date and time of the next meeting will be in this room on Thursday the 20th of November starting at 10 a.m. The meeting is now adjourned.